The great crystal halls of Nexus Prime had not seen an emergency meeting in 300 years. Today, 12 different alien species gathered in fear. Their bodies glowed with nervous light as they floated, crawled, and walked into the massive. Chamber. Kung Minho sat in his small apartment in Seoul, drinking coffee and reading the morning news. He had no idea that beings from across the galaxy were meeting because of him. He was just a simple man who liked to think about big questions. He taught philosophy at the local university and spent his free time writing papers that most people never read. 3 weeks ago, Minho had published a short paper. It was only 47 pages long. The title was Recursive Consciousness and Infinite Possibility Matrices. He wrote it in simple words that anyone could understand. He thought maybe a few hundred people would read it. He was wrong. The paper had spread across the galaxy faster than any virus. Every advanced alien civilization had read it. Every government had studied it. Every military leader had analyzed it. And they were all terrified. At Nexus Prime, the council leader rose from its crystal throne. It was tall and made of living crystal that changed colors when it spoke. "We face the greatest threat in galactic history," it said. Its voice echoed through the chamber like breaking glass. "A single human has created something more dangerous than their nuclear weapons, more dangerous than their plasma cannons, more dangerous than anything we have ever seen." The other council members shifted nervously. The Vorthan representative, a blob of purple energy, pulsed with worry. How can one human paper be so dangerous? It asked. "Because," said the crystal being, "this human has discovered something we hoped they never would. He has found the connection between thought and reality." On Earth, Park Ji-won knocked on Minho's door. She was his research partner and one of the few people who truly understood his work. Minho opened the door with a smile. "Ji-won, perfect timing. I just made fresh coffee." "Minho," she said, looking worried, "have you seen the news from the outer colonies?" "No. Why?" "Strange things are happening. Ships are changing course for no reason. Entire space stations are going dark. And they're all saying the same thing before they disappear." "What are they saying?" "Your name." Minho frowned. "That doesn't make sense. I'm just a philosophy teacher." Back at Nexus Prime, Lee Ha-yan stood in a small waiting room. He was Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, and he had been called to this emergency meeting with no explanation. He was nervous. In his 20 years as ambassador, he had never seen the aliens this scared. A guard made of metal and light approached him. "The council will see you now," it said in perfect Korean. Lee walked into the great chamber and felt small. The 12 species of the council looked down at him from their seats. Each one was more alien than the last. Some had tentacles, some were made of gas, some looked like living rocks. But they all had one thing in common. They were afraid. "Ambassador." "Lee," said the crystal leader, "we need to talk about one of your people, Kung Minho." Lee blinked. "The philosophy professor? What about him?" "He has written something that threatens the entire galaxy." "Sir, with respect, Professor Kang writes about consciousness and thought." "How could that threaten anyone?" The Nexari representative, a creature that looked like a floating brain, spoke up. "Because your species thinks differently than we do. When we read his paper, we understand it as theory. When humans read it, something else happens." "What happens?" "They start to change reality." In Seoul, Minho was reading the reports Ji-won had brought. 3 deep space mining stations had gone silent after their human crew members read his paper. A trade ship had appeared in 2 different star systems at the same time. A research facility had reported that one of their human scientists had made a dead plant grow again just by thinking about it. "This is impossible," Minho said. "Is it?" Ji-won asked. Your paper talks about how consciousness can affect quantum probability. What if you're not just theorizing? What if you're giving instructions? Minho set down his coffee cup. His hand was shaking. You're saying my paper is actually teaching people to change reality with their minds? I'm saying that's what the evidence suggests. At Nexus Prime, the council was voting. They had three choices. First, they could capture Minho and lock him away forever. Second, they could destroy all copies of his paper and hope the knowledge would die with him. Third, they could try to understand what was happening and find a way to control it. The vote was close. 7 species wanted to capture Minho. 4 wanted to destroy the paper. Only 1 wanted to study the problem. The decision is made, said the crystal leader. We will send a team to Earth to capture the human philosopher. This knowledge cannot be allowed to spread. But it was already too late. As they spoke, copies of Minho's paper were being downloaded by humans all across the galaxy. Students were reading it in universities. Scientists were discussing it in labs. Artists were finding inspiration in its ideas. And wherever humans read it and truly understood it, small changes began to happen. A broken machine would suddenly work. A wilted flower would bloom. A sick person would feel better. Nothing big. Nothing dramatic. But reality itself was starting to bend around human thought. Li Haiyan left the council meeting with a heavy heart. He had been ordered to help capture Minho, but something felt wrong about it. If humans really had this power, shouldn't they be allowed to explore it? Shouldn't they be allowed to grow? He made a decision that would change everything. Instead of helping the council, he would warn Earth. He would give humanity time to prepare for what was coming. As he boarded his ship back to Earth, Li didn't know that he was already too late to stop what Minho had started. The paper had been read by over 1 million humans. The knowledge was spreading like fire through dry grass. And somewhere in the deep corners of human consciousness, something ancient was beginning to wake up. Something that had always been there, waiting for the right words to set it free. Council had feared a human thought more than a bomb. Soon they would learn that their fear was not big enough. Choi Soon-ho had always been careful with dangerous things. As a quantum engineer, he worked with forces that could tear holes in space if handled wrong. But when he first read Kang Minho's paper, he felt something he had never felt before. Fear of an idea. The paper sat on his desk for 3 days before he dared to read it completely. It started simple enough. Minho wrote about how the human brain processes information. He talked about consciousness like it was a tool, not just a side effect of having a brain. But as Sun Ho read deeper, the ideas became stranger. Consciousness operates in recursive loops, Minho had written. Each thought creates a feedback loop with quantum probability. The observer doesn't just observe reality. The observer participates in creating it. At first, Sun Ho thought this was just philosophy. Pretty words with no real meaning. Then he decided to test it. He gathered 5 human volunteers from his research team. He gave them each a copy of Minho's paper and asked them to read it carefully. He didn't tell them what he was looking for. He just asked them to think about the ideas while he monitored them with his quantum sensors. The results were impossible. Kim Nari, a neuroscientist from Bizin, was reviewing the same test data in her lab. She had been studying human brains for 15 years, but what she was seeing made no sense. The brain scans of the volunteers showed something that shouldn't exist. When the volunteers read Minho's paper and really understood it, their brains started working differently. Not just thinking differently, actually working differently. New neural pathways formed in minutes instead of months. Brain waves synchronized in patterns that had never been recorded before. But the strangest part was what happened around them. Look at this, Nari said to her assistant, pointing at the readings. Subject 3's brain activity spiked exactly when the quantum sensors detected space-time fluctuations in the room. It's like his thoughts were affecting the fabric of reality. Her assistant frowned. That's impossible. Thoughts are just electrical impulses in the brain. They can't affect anything outside the skull. That's what I thought too, Nari said. But look at this video. On the screen, they watched one of the volunteers, a young woman named Han Sora, sitting in a chair reading Minho's paper. As she read, a dead plant on the nearby table began to show signs of life. Its withered leaves straightened. Its brown stem turned green. By the time she finished reading, the plant looked healthy and strong. She never touched it, Nari whispered. She never even looked at it. She was just thinking about the concepts in the paper. The video continued. Sora closed the paper and looked around the room. Her eyes widened when she saw the plant. Did that plant look different when I came in? She asked. The researchers had no answer. Meanwhile, at Nexus Prime, the Council was learning the full scope of the problem. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Every time a human read Minho's paper and truly understood it, reality started to bend around them. The Krillian Empire reported that their human prisoners had escaped by walking through solid walls. The Zephyrian Trade Federation said they're human. Employees were solving engineering problems by thinking new solutions into existence. The hegemony of worlds claimed that a human diplomat had ended a war by making both sides forget why they were fighting. How is this possible? Demanded the Vorthan representative. Humans are not even a Class 3 civilization. They barely understand quantum mechanics. How can they manipulate reality itself? The Crystal Council leader had been asking the same question. It had studied every advanced species in the galaxy. None of them had ever shown this ability. Even the ancient precursors, with all their technology, had never been able to think changes into reality. We believe it is because of how human consciousness evolved, said Dr. Elix, the Council's chief xenobiologist. It looked like a walking tree, made of silver metal. Most species evolved to adapt to their environment. Humans evolved to change their environment. Explain, ordered the leader. When other species faced a problem, they changed themselves to fit the solution. When humans faced a problem, they changed the world around them to create a solution. This made their brains work differently. Their consciousness doesn't just observe reality. It expects to be able to change reality, and Minho's paper tells them how. Minho's paper tells them that they already know how. It just reminds them. Back on Earth, Minho was beginning to understand what he had done. Reports were flooding in from around the world. A farmer in Brazil had ended a drought by thinking about rain. A doctor in Norway had cured a patient's cancer by believing the disease had never existed. A child in Australia had brought her dead pet back to life by refusing to accept that it was gone. I need to stop this, Minho told Jiwan. They were sitting in his apartment, watching the news reports pour in. People are going to get hurt. Are they? Jiwan asked. Look at what's actually happening. That farmer saved his crops and fed his village. That doctor saved a life. That child got her pet back. Who's being hurt? But the aliens are scared. The council thinks we're dangerous. Maybe we are. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Jiwan pulled up a report from the outer colonies. Human mining crew read your paper last week. Their asteroid mining operation was failing because the rocks were too hard to break. After they read your paper, they started finding veins of pure metals that weren't there before. Not digging them up, finding them. As if the metals had always been there, waiting. Minho stared at the report. They thought the metals into existence, or they thought themselves into a reality where the metals existed. Does it matter which? At his research station, Choi Sunho was running more tests. He had 20 volunteers now, all human, all reading Minho's paper. The quantum disturbances were getting stronger. Reality was becoming more flexible around them. One volunteer, a mechanic named Park Dae-yun, had fixed a broken machine by imagining it had never been broken. Another, an artist named Song My-rae, had painted a picture that showed tomorrow's weather with perfect accuracy. A third, a mathematician named Lim Yeho, had solved an equation that had puzzled scientists for decades by dreaming the answer. What are we becoming? Sung-ho wondered aloud in her lab. Kim Nari was asking the same question. Her brain scans showed that humans who read Minho's paper were developing new types of brain activity. They weren't becoming superhuman. They were becoming something that had no name. The other species in the galaxy think with their brains, she told her assistant. But humans think with their brains and something else. Something that connects them to the quantum structure of reality itself. What do we call that? Evolution, Nari said simply. The council was beginning to realize that they faced an impossible choice. They could try to stop humanity from developing this ability, but how do you stop an idea? How do you prevent people from thinking? Or they could try to understand it, but that might mean accepting that humans were becoming something beyond their control, something that might not need the council's permission to reshape the galaxy as reports continued to pour in. One thing became clear. Kang Minho hadn't just written a paper about consciousness. He had written an instruction manual for the next step in human evolution, and every human who read it was taking that step. Yoon Dae-ho had spent his whole life following rules. As Earth's chief scientist, he reported to committees, filled out forms, and asked permission for everything. But when the Galactic Council ordered him to stop all research into Minho's theories, he made a choice that surprised everyone, including himself. He decided to break the rules. We need to understand what's happening to us, he told his team in a secret meeting. The council wants us to stay ignorant, but ignorance won't protect. U.S. If humans really can change reality with their thoughts, we need to know how it works. His assistant, Dr. Ro Min-jae, looked worried. If the council finds out we're disobeying their orders, they could ban humans from all galactic trade. We could be cut off from the rest of the universe. And if we don't understand this power, we might accidentally destroy ourselves, Dae-ho replied. Which risk is greater? They decided to run one controlled test. Just one. They would teach Minho's theories to a single volunteer and see what happened under carefully monitored conditions. They chose Song Mira, an artist from Jeju Island. She had no scientific background, no special training, and no knowledge of quantum physics. She was perfect because she was ordinary. Why me? Mira asked when they explained the experiment. Because you're not a scientist, Dao said. Scientists have too many ideas about what's possible and what's not. We need someone who can think without limits. They brought Myra to a research facility on the dark side of Earth's moon. The location was secret, hidden from both the Council's censors and Earth's government. 7 different alien civilizations had secretly provided monitoring equipment despite the Council's ban. They all wanted to know the truth. For 3 days, Dae-ho taught Mira everything Minho had written. Not just the words, but the ideas behind them. He explained how consciousness might work like a tool that could shape reality. He showed her how thoughts might create loops that affect quantum probability. Mira listened carefully. She asked simple questions that made Dae-ho think in new ways. So you're saying my thoughts are connected to everything around me? She asked. On the second day, according to Minho's theory, yes. Then why don't my thoughts change things all the time? Because most of the time, we don't believe they can. Belief might be the key. On the third day, Mira said she understood. It's like painting, she told Dae-ho. When I paint, I imagine what I want to create, and then I make it real with my brush. This is the same, except reality is the canvas, and my mind is the brush, exactly. On the fourth day, they ran the test. Mira sat in a sealed chamber made of transparent aluminum. The room contained nothing except a chair, a table, and a single dead flower in a glass vase. The flower had been dead for 2 weeks. Every molecule had been analyzed. Every cell had been confirmed as lifeless. Outside the chamber, dozens of instruments watched and measured everything. Quantum sensors tracked probability fluctuations. Temporal monitors looked for changes in the flow of time. Reality itself was being watched with the most advanced tools 7 civilizations could provide. Bei Taiyang, the Council's military strategist, watched from a hidden observation post. He had disobeyed direct orders to be here, but he needed to see this for himself. If humans really could think reality into new shapes, it would change everything about how wars were fought, how power was balanced, and how the galaxy was governed. Begin. The test, Dio said over the intercom. Myra looked at the dead flower. It was brown and withered, its petals fallen, its stem bent and dry. According to every law of biology, it was beyond saving. She closed her eyes and thought about what Minho had taught her. Consciousness creates loops with reality. Observation shapes what is observed. Belief makes the impossible possible. She opened her eyes and looked at the flower again. But this time, she didn't see it as dead. She saw it as sleeping. She imagined it in a state where death was just a temporary condition, like winter before. Spring. The instruments went crazy. Quantum probability readings spiked beyond anything ever recorded. Temporal sensors detected ripples in space-time. Energy monitors showed massive power flows with no identifiable source. And the flower began to bloom, not slowly, like a plant returning to health, not through any visible process of cellular repair. One moment it was dead, brown, and withered. The next moment it was alive, red, and beautiful. The monitoring equipment showed no energy expenditure, no cellular regeneration, no molecular reconstruction. The flower hadn't been healed or repaired or brought back to life. That it had simply never been dead. Myra smiled and opened her eyes. Did it work? Deho stared at the readings, his hands shaking. According to our instruments, you didn't make the flower live again. You made it exist in a state where it had never died. Is there a difference? All the difference in the universe. Taiyang watched from his hidden position, his military mind calculating implications. If one human could alter the basic state of matter with a thought, what could 1,000,000 humans do? What could 1,000,000,000 humans do? He imagined human fleets that couldn't be destroyed because their crews thought them into states where destruction was impossible. He imagined human weapons that won battles by making enemy ships exist in realities where they had never been built. He imagined wars where victory went to whoever could imagine. Victory most completely. The balance of galactic power wouldn't just shift. It would cease to exist. Back on Earth, reports of the experiment leaked despite all security measures. Within hours, the news was spreading through human communication networks. Myra's name became famous overnight. The video of the blooming flower was downloaded by millions. And as humans watched the video and read the reports, they began to understand something profound. The power wasn't unique to Myra. It wasn't unique to trained scientists or philosophers or artists. Every human had it. Some tried small experiments. A broken toy fixed by a child who believed it should work. A wilted houseplant revived by an elderly man who remembered it when it was young. A stalled car started by a woman who imagined it running smoothly. Others attempted bigger changes. A drought ended when an entire village focused on bringing rain. A landslide reversed itself when a town imagined the mountain as it had been before. An extinct butterfly species reappeared in a nature preserve after students read about it and wished it back into existence. The changes were still small, still local, still temporary. But they were growing stronger. At Nexus Prime, emergency sessions ran around the clock. The council faced the truth they had been avoiding. They couldn't stop an idea once it entered human consciousness. They couldn't regulate thought. They couldn't control imagination. "We have two choices," the Crystal Leader announced to the assembled council. "We can try to destroy humanity before they fully develop this ability. Or we can try to understand and work with this new reality." "Destroy them how?" asked the Vorthan representative. "If they can think our weapons out of existence? And if we become their enemies," added the Nexari brain creature, "what's to stop them from thinking us out of existence?" For the first time in galactic history, the council faced an opponent they couldn't fight, couldn't control, and couldn't understand. They faced the power of human imagination set free. And somewhere on Earth, in a small apartment in Seoul, Kong, Minho sat at his desk and began writing his next paper. This one would be called Collective Consciousness and Shared Reality Matrices. If his first paper had taught humans to change reality individually, his second paper would teach them to change reality together. The council's worst fears were about to become much worse. Nam Jisoo had always been good at explaining complicated things in simple ways. As Earth's most popular science educator, she made videos that helped millions of people understand everything from black holes to DNA. When she read Kang Minho's paper, she knew she had to share it with the world. "This isn't just science," she told her production team. "This is the next step in human development. Everyone deserves to understand what we're capable of." Her team was nervous. "The government said not to spread this information," her director warned. "The aliens are scared. Maybe we should listen to them." "When in human history has it been good to keep knowledge secret?" Jisoo asked. "When has ignorance ever protected us?" She spent a week creating a simple, clear explanation of Minho's theories. She used everyday language and common examples. She made the impossible sound natural and the complex feel simple. Her video was called The Power of Human Thought, What Every Person Should Know. She uploaded it to every platform she could find. Within 6 hours, it had 10 million views. Within a day, it had 100 million. The changes began immediately. Oh Minji was 7 years old and lived in Bizen with her grandfather. He had been sick for months with cancer that the doctors couldn't cure. She watched Jisoo's video on her grandfather's tablet while he slept. The video explained how human consciousness could affect reality by believing something completely. It showed how thoughts could create new possibilities. It taught that imagination wasn't just pretending, but a way of exploring what could be real. Minji didn't understand all the big words, but she understood the main idea. If she believed something strongly enough, it could become true. She looked at her sleeping grandfather, thin and pale from his illness. She closed her eyes and imagined him healthy. Not getting better slowly, but healthy right now, the way he had been before he got sick. Imagined him in a reality where the cancer had never existed. She thought about him laughing and cooking her favorite meals and taking her to the park. She believed in this reality with all the trust that only a child can have. When her grandfather woke up, his color had returned. The pain in his chest was gone. The next day, his doctors found no trace of cancer in his body. They called it a miracle, but Minji knew better. She had thought him well. Across the city, Lim Wujin was stuck in traffic on his way to work. The highways of New Tokyo were always crowded, a problem that engineers had struggled with for decades. As he sat in his car, he remembered Jisoo's video. What if the traffic problem had always been solved? What if better city planning had been done 50 years ago? What if the transportation system had been designed by people who understood how to move millions of people efficiently? He didn't try to change the present. Instead, he imagined himself existing in a timeline where smarter choices had been made long ago. He focused on the feeling of living in a well-planned city where traffic flowed like water around him. The traffic began to move. Roads that had been narrow became wider. Bridges that had never existed appeared between buildings. Traffic lights synchronized themselves in perfect patterns. Within an hour, the daily traffic jam that plagued millions of people simply stopped being a problem. The city engineers who investigated found that all the improvements had always been there in the city records. The bridges had been built decades ago. The wider roads had been part of the original plan. The synchronized lights had been installed years earlier. Reality had redesigned itself around the belief that the problems had already been solved. In Kenya, HFY was a farmer watching his crops die in the worst drought in living memory. His family had farmed this land for generations, but the rains had stopped coming 3 years ago. He had watched Jisu's video on his phone while sitting in his dying fields. He thought about rain, but not rain in the future. Rain that was already falling. Rain that had been falling all along, in a version of reality where the drought had never happened. The sky was clear when he started thinking. There were no clouds, no wind, no sign of moisture in the air. But HFY imagined himself in a world where the rains came every season, where his crops grew green and tall, where his family prospered. The rain started as a light mist. Then it became a gentle shower. Within an hour, it was falling steadily across the entire region. It continued for 3 days, soaking the ground and filling the rivers. When meteorologists studied the weather patterns, they found that the rain had always been predicted. Their old forecasts, when checked, showed that seasonal rains had been expected all along. The drought, according to all historical records, had ended exactly when it was supposed to. Reality had rewritten its own history to match human belief. But the most dramatic change happened in Geneva, where Zhang Ryawan, the council's xenopsychologist, was giving a secret presentation to Earth's leaders. Ryawan was different from other council members. She had studied human psychology for decades and understood how human minds worked better than any alien. She had been warning the council about human potential for years, but they had never listened. Now she was warning Earth. Your species is changing, she told the assembled presidents and prime ministers. This isn't just about individuals gaining new abilities. This is about your entire species evolving into something unprecedented. President Chun of the Asian Federation asked, "How long do we have before the council tries to stop us?" "They're already trying," Ryawan said. "But they don't understand what they're fighting. You can't stop an idea with weapons. You can't control imagination with laws. They think they're facing a military threat, but they're actually facing evolution itself." "What do you mean?" Ryawan showed them brain scans from around the world. Every human who truly understands Minho's concepts shows the same pattern. New neural pathways. Enhanced connectivity between different brain regions. And most importantly, synchronized brain waves with other humans who have had the same realization. Synchronized how? You're developing a collective consciousness, not losing your individuality, but connecting your minds in ways that let you share thoughts and work together on a quantum level. When enough humans believe the same thing, reality itself has to adjust and match that belief. The room was quiet as the leaders absorbed this information. "How many is enough?" asked President Okafor of the African Union. "We don't know, but we're about to find out." As they spoke, Jisu's video was being watched by children in schools, workers in factories, students in universities, and families in their homes. The simplified explanation of Minho's theories was spreading faster than any government could track or control. And as each person understood the concepts, small changes rippled outward from them. A sick person became well. A broken machine started working. A dead garden came back to life. An impossible problem found its solution. The changes were still small, still individual, but they were connecting. The humans who had learned to bend reality were starting to sense each other. Their thoughts were beginning to resonate together, in soul. Minho felt it happening. He could sense millions of minds awakening to the same truths he had discovered. He could feel their thoughts touching his across vast distances. They're all learning, he told G1. Every human who watches that video, who really understands what we're capable of, becomes part of something larger. Part of what? I'm not sure yet. But I think we're about to find out what happens when an entire species learns to think reality into new shapes. At Nexus Prime, a council watched their worst nightmare unfold. The reports were flooding in. From every human world, every human station, every human ship. Reality was becoming flexible wherever humans gathered and focused their thoughts together. And there were billions of humans. They're not trying to conquer us, the crystal leader said with something like wonder in its voice. They're not even thinking about us. They're just becoming what they were always meant to be. And what is that? Asked the Vorthan representative. Gods, the leader replied. They're becoming gods who don't realize their own power yet. The council faced a truth that no advanced civilization had ever confronted. They weren't dealing with a rival species or a military threat. They were witnessing the birth of something entirely new. 6 months after Nanjisu's video changed everything, Kang Minho stood in his garden and watched flowers grow in patterns that spelled out mathematical equations. He hadn't planted them that way. He hadn't even thought about doing it. The flowers had grown in response to his thoughts about the connection between beauty and truth. Everything had changed, but not in the way anyone expected. Humans hadn't conquered the galaxy. They hadn't built mighty fleets or claimed vast territories. Instead, they had simply begun to exist in ways that made old ideas about conquest and territory seem pointless. Why fight over a planet when you could think new worlds into existence? Why hoard resources when you could imagine abundance? Why fear death when consciousness itself could reshape the rules that governed life? Minho had spent the months after the awakening working with Park Ji-won to understand what humanity was becoming. Together, they had developed what they called thought protocols, ethical guidelines for reality manipulation that helped prevent chaos while allowing for unprecedented growth. The key, Minho explained to a gathering of world leaders, is intention. When we change reality, we have to consider not just what we want, but how our changes affect everyone else. The protocols were simple but profound. First, changes should create more possibilities, not fewer. Second, individual reality shifts should not harm others or limit their freedom. Third, major changes should be made collectively with the conscious agreement of all affected minds. Most importantly, the protocols recognized that with great power came great responsibility to use that power wisely. Not everyone followed the protocols perfectly. There were accidents and mistakes. A teenager in Mumbai accidentally erased gravity from his neighborhood for 3 hours. A group of children in São Paulo thought their school into a giant playground, forgetting that other students needed classrooms. An artist in Paris imagined all the colors in the city becoming more vivid, giving everyone headaches for a week. But humans learned quickly. They developed networks to share knowledge and coordinate their reality-shaping efforts. They created support groups for people struggling with their new abilities. They established schools to teach children how to use their power responsibly. Galaxy watched in amazement the Krillian Empire, which had built its power on controlling scarce resources, found that scarcity itself was disappearing. Humans didn't steal their mineral deposits or conquer their mining worlds. Instead, humans thought new deposits into existence on empty asteroids, sharing the abundance freely with anyone who wanted it. The Zephyrian Trade Federation, whose wealth came from controlling shipping routes, discovered that humans no longer needed to ship goods across space. They could think objects into existence wherever they were needed. But instead of destroying the trade network, humans used their abilities to create new wonders to trade. Artworks that changed based on the viewer's emotions, foods that adapted their taste to each person's preferences, tools that evolved to meet their users' needs. The hegemony of worlds, built on military might, found that their weapons were useless against an enemy that could think attacks out of existence. But they also found that humans had no interest in conquering them. Instead, humans offered to help solve the conflicts that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. When the Council finally agreed to meet with human representatives, they chose to gather on Nexus Prime one more time. But this meeting was different from the emergency session 6 months earlier. This time, they came not in fear, but in wonder. Li Haiyan led the human delegation, but he was no longer just Earth's ambassador. He had become something unprecedented, a representative of a species. That was transitioning beyond the need for traditional government or representation. You feared that we would use our power to dominate, he told the assembled council. But you misunderstood what humans do with power. We don't dominate, we create. The Crystal Council leader, who had spent months studying the changes humans had brought to the galaxy, had to agree. Your species has done something we thought impossible. You have gained godlike abilities and chosen to use them for creation rather than destruction. We're not gods, Li replied. We're just humans who finally understand what we've always been capable of. Around the galaxy, the evidence was everywhere. Barren worlds had become gardens where humans focused their collective imagination on bringing life to dead rocks. Extinct species had returned to worlds where humans remembered them and believed they should still exist. Wars that had raged for centuries had ended when humans imagined peace so completely that the reasons for fighting simply ceased to exist. The changes weren't forced on anyone. Reality adjusted itself to accommodate new possibilities without erasing old ones. The galaxy became richer, more diverse, more alive. Kim Nari, now studying the collective human consciousness from her new research station, had identified what she called synchronicity cascades, moments when millions of human minds focused on the same positive outcome and made it inevitable. When humans around the galaxy simultaneously imagined an end to hunger, food distribution systems improved everywhere. When they collectively envisioned clean energy, new power sources appeared on dozens of worlds. When they shared a vision of peace, conflicts resolved themselves through means that seemed miraculous, but were actually just the universe adjusting to match human belief. But perhaps the most remarkable change was happening in the council chambers themselves. For the first time in galactic history, other species were asking to be taught. We want to understand, said the Nexari representative, its brain-like form pulsing with curiosity. Our species has lived for millions of years believing that reality was fixed, unchangeable. You've shown us that consciousness itself is a tool for shaping existence. Can we learn this too? Minho, who had been invited to address the council, smiled. Every conscious being has this potential. Humans just learned to access it first because of how our consciousness evolved. But consciousness itself is a universal force. With proper understanding and training, any species can learn to participate in reality creation. And so began the first interspecies classes on consciousness interface theory. Not just humans teaching other species, but all conscious beings learning together how to think reality into better shapes. The galaxy entered what historians would later call the age of conscious creation, when the only limits were the boundaries of imagination itself. Ships began to travel not by moving through space, but by thinking themselves into distant locations. Planets were healed not through technology, but through collective belief in their wellness. Art became reality, and reality became art. As the distinction between imagination and existence blurred, the Council of Species became something entirely new, not a governing body, but a coordination center for conscious beings working together to explore the infinite possibilities of existence. And in his small apartment in Seoul, Kang Min-ho sat at his desk and began writing again, not instructions this time, but poetry. Verses about consciousness dancing with quantum possibility. Lines about the universe awakening to its own creative potential through the eyes of thinking beings. His first paper had taught humans to change reality. His poetry was teaching reality to change itself. Outside his window, the city of Seoul grew and shifted in response to the collective dreams of its inhabitants. Buildings reached toward the sky in spirals that defied old physics. Gardens bloomed in patterns that spoke of hope and beauty. Rivers of light flowed between structures, carrying not just energy, but pure possibility. The council had feared a human thought more than a bomb. They had been right to fear it, but for the wrong reasons. They thought it would destroy their universe. Instead, it had set their universe free. In the end, the greatest human achievement wasn't conquering space or mastering technology. It was teaching existence itself to imagine new ways of being. And in a galaxy where thought and reality danced together, there were no limits to what conscious beings could become. The age of scarcity was over. The age of possibility had begun, and it had all started with one human thinking about how consciousness might connect to the quantum structure of reality, then sharing that thought with anyone willing to listen. The council had feared a human thought more than a bomb. They never considered that the thought they feared could finally set the universe free to become everything it had ever dreamed of being.